pockets are full.
Insane? Shut your mouth, traitor! For the king!
So welcome to the first ever video for the Lightning Witchhunter build. Now the reason why I've decided to make this video is because I think since this is 1 week after the game has launched in early access, most of the builds that I've seen on YouTube and other build guides are mostly centered around grenades. And I think just from my own personal playstyle, I don't really like using grenades as much, and I felt that I guess someone had to make a build on how to use projectile skills more on YouTube. And I guess the build that I've discovered that worked really well for me is actually the lightning based build, which utilizes the plasma blast but also the galvanic shard, and you also have high velocity rounds. So it's just starting off with the skills. Now I think when you look into my spirits, for example, you can see that I have 3 spirits equipped. I'll explain more into detail on how you can raise your spirit cap, because I know you get a base 30, I think, from Act 1, from one of the story quests. Now, since we are doing a lightning build, I think the spirit that everyone should first prioritize is actually Herald of Thunder. So I think the way that the skill works is basically whenever you kill an enemy that has a shock debuff, your next 3 attacks essentially shoots out lightning bolts that deals some AoE damage. And combined with Herald of Ash, these two spirit skills really help clear a lot of the trash mobs in the game. So when every time you see a group of enemies packed, you can definitely feel the difference with these 2 spirit skill equipped, because the AoE really helps clear some of the trash mobs in the game. So for the Herald of Thunder, I use the concentrated effect, so I just increase the area of damage, and then I have the Maim equipped, which is basically just reducing the movement speed and also reduce the evasion rating of the enemies. And you also have the blind chance, which also reduce the accuracy rating and evasion rating further for enemies. And then for the Herald of Ash, I just equip brutality. So the reason why I don't really care about the ignite was because I just care about the raw damage. This is a lightning build, so the ignite can be helpful, but I don't really see the impact. So I think I decided to go for more physical damage just to get higher numbers essentially when I kill the small enemies. And then again, I decided to put the magnified effect support gem. So the 40% more area effect really helps with Arrow of Ash as well, because whenever enemy dies, they explode, which is really helpful. And then the spirit that I've used, the spirit I've used, mainly because I have more cap than I needed, was actually Overwhelming Presence. So the reason why I've used this is because it reduced the elemental ailment threshold for the enemy, and what this basically means is that it lowers the amount that you need to effectively shock or electrocute the enemies. So this really helps build up the shock and electrocute value for the enemies, so they get the ailments faster essentially. So the damage skill that I've decided to use are Galvanic Shard. So Galvanic Shard is basically just my bread and butter in wave clearing. So this is a really good spell in just destroying normal enemies. Now this skill in particular is quite bad with dealing with rare enemies. So the one that has the yellow text, and sometimes even you can even struggle with some of the magic enemies as well with the one with the blue text. And I definitely would not recommend using this for bosses because the damage is just not as good. And then since you're basically locked into position and you're very slow during the attack animation, it just makes bossing a lot harder. So I would not recommend using this for boss, so mainly for wave clearing. And the 3 support gems that I've used are close combat, so this just deals 25% more damage to enemies near me. I have 25 more attack speed, and I also used electrocute, so this is a very important spirit skill. Not spirit, the supports gem that you unlock, I believe at tier 2. So if you go to Plasma Blast, I think it's the... Oh, sorry, it's not Plasma, it's Galvanic Shard. It's the Electrocute, so this one is very useful. And the reason why I've used Electrocute even when it deals 40% less damage is mainly because it helps stun enemies. I think when I did the campaign, the first 3 acts, for example, I think the main reason why I usually die in map clearing is because all of the trash mobs eventually gather around me, and I'm basically trapped or sandwiched onto the wall, right? And I can't really dodge roll. So the electrocute, for I guess people who don't really know what electrocute is basically just to help stun the enemies for 5 seconds. Now the build up for bosses aren't that great, so I wouldn't really recommend using Galvanic Shot for bosses, but this is very good at wave clearing and just makes map clearing a lot safer. So I think the second skill that I originally used for, I guess, like a bit tougher enemies, so the one that have more HP like rare enemies or bosses, is actually high velocity runs. I think this skill is, at least from my personal playstyle, the one that helps I guess like kill bosses the easiest, mainly because this skill has such a long range, and then the damage is quite high as well. And then the spirit gem that I use is the inevitable critical, so it just helps with increasing some of the crit chances. Ammo conservation is really useful since the skill itself only has a base ammo of 1. Having a 25% chance to not consume an ammo without reloading basically helps boost your overall DPS. See, for example, I just shot 3 times without reloading. And then the third one that I use is long shot, so it just basically getting more attack damage the further the enemy is. Now originally what I used is actually scatter shot in place of this, because I think before you unlock Plasma Blast, which is the which is the last tier, it's gonna take a while, especially for newer players, to unlock this, because I've literally just unlocked this an hour ago, and then I've decided to use replace Plasma Blast. I decided to use Plasma Blast and then replace the high velocity runs, but I've decided to keep the high velocity runs because some enemies have lightning resistance effects to them. I think like some rare enemies have, if you're unlucky, they can have elemental resistance or lightning resistance, and you don't really want to use any of the Galvanic Shard or Plasma Blast for it. So high velocity runs really helps as an alternative, but especially for newer players who doesn't have Plasma Blast, high velocity runs is definitely the best for bossing or just really finishing off tougher enemies. So again, it's really good, and especially with the scatter shot, it basically just makes the bullet basically adds 2 more bullets or 2 projectiles to the skill, and it really helps with the overall DPS. Now Plasma Blast is now what I've been using ever since I unlocked it. I think since have you seen from the boss clearing, I think the damage is just absolutely insane. And because I think mainly because it converts 70% of the physical damage to lightning damage, and then again with the scatter blast, when you add the 2 projectiles to it, it just absolutely clears bosses, right? So just do a bit of showcase on how it works. So there is about 2-second load time on this, so you have to be very careful when using it against bosses. I think you have to be careful, with attacks. But essentially with the scatter blast, it makes the animation a bit longer, but you're able to shoot 3 bullets instead of 1. So just to showcase what it looks like without scatter blast, you have a same 2 seconds animation, but then you can only shoot once, right? And then you have to reload and then do it again. So with scatter shot is which is something I highly recommend. It just makes the whole burst damage a lot faster. And then the other support skill that I've used is just primal ornament, so just increasing 25% more elemental damage. Now this is again a witch build. Some of these gems might not be optimized, but that's mainly because you know, you can only use one type of gem in any build unless you're doing the other ascendancy for mercenaries, which allows you to equip multiple gems, right? So these are the gems that I've used. Now the two support skills that I've used are emergency reload and voltaic mark. Now emergency reload just helps reloads some of these skills faster, but it also, I think more importantly, it also increases the damage of the reloaded bullet essentially. And then I just use the 30% increased cooldown recovery just to make the cooldowns a bit faster, because the cooldown time is 45 on base. And then I just put the skill Empower to deal 15% more damage just to make the basically the buff stronger. And I would recommend using this in combo with the Plasma Blast or the High Velocity rounds if you haven't unlocked Plasma Blast. So I think the rotations would be also after you shoot yours, your first bullet, and then you would reload, and then basically the next 3 bullets will be buffed using the emergency reload. And then Voltaic Mark just really helps with bosses or tougher enemies as well. So this is originally not a mercenary skill. So if you've never seen it in the gem, in the skill gem, for example, it's because it is not there. But if you just type Voltaic Mark on the all gem section, you should be able to see Voltaic Mark here. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is a monk skill. I could be wrong, but this is something that you can use because it just scales with dex. So I think the stat requirement shouldn't be too much of a trouble. But what this does basically is just helps increase some of the shock damage. So you have 50% more shock, and it hits. Yeah, and basically the shock that you apply to the enemy is amplified. Now, again, this is mainly for bosses, and I think once when you just started the game, high velocity rounds is what you're gonna use. And given that high velocity round doesn't have shock, Voltaic Mark is there to sort of help still apply that shock debuff on the enemy, so it's really useful. And the duration is quite long as well; it's about 8 seconds. So the support gen I use is just for the persistence, so just increasing the skill duration. The conduction is basically 100% more chance to shock, so it just makes the probability higher to apply shock because it's not guaranteed. And then the third one I just is called Exile, so basically apply some critical hit chance when I apply the debuff to the enemy. So that's just really the skills that I've used. Again, you don't really need this much spirits. I think the minimum that you need is about 60. And then some of the support gems that I use on the spirits are pretty much optional. I think the ones that cost additional spirits, right? So this one, for example, Vitality, you don't really need this because it costs 20 additional spirits, and this one, 10 spirits, just to increase the accuracy. You don't really need it. But yeah, so moving on to the gear section. So I think when with any builds, the first thing you want to prioritize is your weapon, because most of your skills, if not all of your skill, is scaled on your weapon, right? So if you look at the Galvanic Shard, it scales 40% on physical damage. This one scales pretty much 100% on physical damage, and Plasma Blast scales about 70%. So what you're looking for in a crossbow is actually just the raw physical damage. And then one way to improve this is either by increasing the quality, so it helps improve the physical damage number. But I think the most important effects that you need, or you should look for, is in the increased physical damage, right? So this directly increases the number of the physical damage, and this physical damage basically increases your skill damage as well. Now the added damage, like added physical damage or like fire, is nice to have. You don't really need to have it, especially early on. But I think just try to look for the highest base stat in the physical damage you can, and this is basically affected from the increased physical damage effects, right? And then one of the things that I like to have is, for instance, just adding more dexterity, so helping having more stats is always useful, especially upgrading gems. Accuracy rating, I think it's good. I don't really know how important this is. And then increased light radius is, I guess, a nice to have, right? But again, what you're only looking for is just the increased physical damage. Now I think since this is the bow that I've been using for quite a while, I think for the past basically 12 levels, I decided to upgrade it to max quality, and I've even put two slots just to put in the Storm Rune and the Iron Rune just for the increased physical damage and lightning damage. So optional, but you don't really have to do it. Now in terms of gear, I think especially when you're leveling like me, you don't really need anything, I guess, like super good. Obviously with any gears that you have, the biggest priority is just making sure you have enough resistance, so make sure you don't have negative numbers, and then you want to have at least a good amount of armor evasion and some life as well, right? Now I think just to answer maybe some of the questions you might have on how to increase the spirits, so there I think from the way that I've discovered so far, there are two ways to increase spirits. Actually, three ways if you're playing Witch, I think. But for Mercenary, the only way you can get more spirits is by some of the armor affixes. So the armor affix that I have has 48 spirits here, and then I also have an amulet that increases spirits. So these two gear slots, so 48 plus 34 plus 12 is the one that helps me gain 124 spirits in total. So on top of the 30 that you get from the story, and then I guess like other than that, all my gears are pretty standard, so these are some of them are pretty good. I think for this one, for boots, what I recommend is always increase movement speed, but other than that, you know, any stats or any defensive stats like armor evasion rating is always nice. Having dexterity or strength stats is always really nice as well, just to increase some of the stats you have. And then again, the rest is just making sure that you have enough resistance to go to not go negative numbers at least. And then I guess like one of the things that I really enjoyed having is having a leech physical attack damage on one of the gears. So I have it on the ring, for example, and it just really helps sustain your life, so you don't really have to rely too much on your potion for healing. I think especially maybe for some of you who have experience with boss fights, I think if you rely too much on the life flask, I think for some boss fights you don't spawn mobs, so you can't refill it, and the moment this flask is gone, you can't heal yourself anymore, right? So the leech on physical attack damage as life is always nice to have, so you don't have to be too reliant on your flask. So I guess like the flask, this is the flask that I use. It's not really important what you use, and I guess the charm that I've used is lightning, and that's mainly because lightning is the lowest resistance that I have, so I just decided to use lightning on this one. So moving on into the skill tree. So again, so this is a Witch Hunter Ascendancy build, and I've only unlocked 4 so far, and I'm supposed to unlock the other 2 within this act. But I guess the first 4 that I would always recommend is these, is within this line. So these 2 are the same, which basically just means that enemies that are on low life get increased damage, and what you mean by low life is basically 35% or less HP, right? So this really helps finish off enemies. But the 2 important ones that we have is Culling Strike and Decimating Strike. So Culling Strike basically just means that enemies gets instantly killed if they reach a minimum HP threshold. So for normal enemies it's 30%, magic is 20%, so rare the yellow text is 10%, and for bosses 5%, right? And then this really works well with Decimating Strike, because Decimating Strike basically damages the enemy between 5 and 30% for the first hit that you apply to them, right? I think when you look at the videos for the clearing and the boss that I've made, you can definitely see that it really helps burst down the boss. And I think what most people, I guess, like missed out is basically Culling Strike for normal enemies finished off 30% or below, but Decimating Strike has the opportunity to remove the first 30%, right? So if you remove the first 30% and all you need is to kill the last 30%, this basically means that you only need to damage 40% of the enemy HP, and then the 60% is basically what these 2 skills or 2 nodes do. So really useful, really helps burst down enemies, and really helps with bosses as well. Now I think when you look at the skill tree, I think one of the things that you first notice is that I don't really put any skill points into any electric or any shock or any I guess like electrocute skill points, and I have a reason for that, right? So I think just starting off on how you should start the skill tree, and I've always liked putting more attack speed, so I've gone this way, and then just to get battle hardened, and then remorseless, and then feel no pain. So this is just our 3 really good nodes to have early on. And then I've decided to get the ailment chance mainly because I think especially early on you only have galvanic shard to apply shock. And I guess like the chance of applying shock isn't really that high in the first place. So I think just being able to increase the ailment of the inflict ailment, it just really helps with the consistency of applying shock. And then the break 30% armor on ailment is always nice. And then again afterwards, the things that I always recommend to go after this is the within this one. So basically, damage hits with is lucky with enemy that are on low life, and also you have increased damage. There basically more increased damage for people who are on low life, but also helps stun build up as well. So this is basically helps with the decimating strike as well. So I think for bosses, right, for unique, they only have you can only start killing them at 5%. So the low life still helps them. It helps them clear the rare and unique bosses more. And then I guess like since you are doing a shotgun build for wave clearing, I took clear space just for the increased knockback, so it just really helps push some of the enemies back so they don't surround you, or when you're clearing maps and then they just group around you, it just helps clear some space. And then the important notes that I would always recommend for any build is adrenaline rush, so it just helps increase movement speed, but also in the attack speed of the kill when the attack speed of your skills after you kill an enemy recently. And then the movement speed here is just really nice to have. It just makes clearing a lot faster, and I think when you just started the game, the movement feels a bit clunky, and having movement speed is always nice. Now the next one that I recommend is the instant reload. So 40% increased reload speed is always really nice. It really helps just increase your overall DPS. I think for newer players as well, what they don't realize is that sometimes when you shoot right and you press left click, why some people are a bit confused why you're not shooting anything. So that's just basically the reload speed, right? I think early on reload speed in the class is horrible, and that's why I decided to use the reload speed here just to make everything a lot smoother. So increased reload speed on these three nodes are really nice. So the gem that I've used, so I've actually bought this from the trade market, but I think when you look for any jewels, the stats, since this is a electric build, what I always recommend is having an increased shock duration somewhere there. And then the rise is just really nice to have, right? I think this one is really good. I have increased attack speed as well, so it just helps increase the attack speeds of all of my skills with the crossbow, accuracy, and then the active charm increased damage is just nice to have. But the increased shock duration is what you always want, because it's quite hard to get shock ailments in general. But then if you get shock debuff on the enemy already, I think the thing that you want the most is to extend the duration, so that you don't have to keep reapplying it as much, right? So increased shock duration is always nice. And afterwards, what I like to go is just go down here again, and then just to get the increased inflict ailment. So it's just to increase the shock chance as well. I don't really bother going here too much because I don't really find the pierce very useful, at least for the galvanic shard. I think it's good enough for wave clearing already. And then again, I put another jewel here, and the thing that I prioritize is just increased shock damage, and this one is very good as well because I have increased attack damage and attack speed. But again, this is not really necessary. I think increased shock duration is what you need the most. And then for the bottom here is actually quite optional. I think depending on your gear and how much attribute you can get from the gear, you don't really need to take the increased attribute from any of these nodes. I think the only reason why I need them is because I think for some of the gem levels, so if I take the Herald of Thunder, for example, or the Herald of Ash, you need about 106 strength. But then without this increased attribute, my strength is below that, and then it's quite hard for me to replace gear at this stage. So that's why I decided to put some into this node. But if completely optional depending on what gear you have. But then the one that I always recommend is getting full salvo and reusable ammunition. So again, since Plasma Blast and High Velocity rounds only have one bullet, I think the increased chance to not consume a bolt is really nice, and then it helps pair up with the skill gem or ammo conservation, right? So on top of the 25% here, you have 15%, so you basically have 40% chance to not consume your ammo, and it just helps boost your DPS because you don't have to reload your skill again. And then the reason why I put full salvo is because again, I think when you wave clear or when you map clear, there are some rares in mixed up with the mobs, and then for example, you're gonna use the galvanic shard to shoot some of the trash mobs, but then the enemies that are a bit tankier, you're gonna want to finish them off with high velocity rounds, or you're gonna finish them off with the plasma blast, right? So I think when you decide to play this build, you're gonna see yourself switching ammo quite often depending on the scenario, and then this basically just helps increase the damage every time you switch the ammo. So really useful. Now, and then afterwards, what I always recommend is always getting the next node, which is Giant Slayer. So again, yes, this really helps kill bosses and some of the rare enemies. So it just helps burst them down to get more damage. And then for the Call of Hordes, it's just to increase the Culling Strike. So from the Culling Strike threshold, right, it's just about 25%, so it's about 30% for normal enemies, for example, but to increase 25%, so basically means 25% of 30 is about 8. So a normal enemies basically dies at 38%, right? So it just really helps increase the insta-kill mechanic basically for the Ascendancy. Now, I'm only level 53. I'm not as high level as other YouTubers or other build guiders, but I guess like moving forward, what I plan is going to staking the Flash Storm, so increased shock damage and also penetrates 50% lightning resistance on damage. I think I will prioritize this now mainly because I have Plasma Blast. So the reason why I didn't take any of the I guess like lightning damage nodes, for example, like the one here or the one here or the one here for like electric buildup, is because again, before you unlock Plasma Blast for early game players, you're gonna have to use a combination of your Galvanic Shard and your high velocity runs. So you don't really want to commit on a skill that only buffs one of them instead of both, right? That's why for I guess like the majority of my first 50-60 points is mainly an overall good thing to have regardless of what build you do. But then the moment you unlock your Plasma Blast is basically when you want to start prioritizing on your lightning nodes, right? Now so since we have electrocute build up on Galvanic Shard, I think I've decided to experiment with this increased electrocute build up, but then again, I think the build up itself is already good enough for clearing trash mobs. So I wouldn't really recommend using this. I think this is more if you decided to use electrocute build up for bosses, because the electrocute build up for bosses is very slow. But then I think just to clear maps in general, I don't really recommend this. I think the one I recommend is taking this one. Lightning damage with non-critical hit is lucky. It's always nice to have. And then this one is the damage penetrates 15% lightning resistance. And after I finish with this one, I would recommend going with the increased chance to shock again and electrocute build up. I guess it's nice to have as well. And then maybe go back to some of the lightning nodes just to get that AoE shock going on, just to make shock more consistent, so you can trigger the Herald of Thunder more often. But yeah, so that's really in terms of all of the skills that I guess plan to do. And again, for the Ascendancy, once I have more points, I think I will try to unlock, for the next 2 points, I'll try to unlock this too, just to have more area of effect. So for the Herald of Ash and Herald of Thunder, just to get more AoEs on them, but also just to have like another mechanic to explode the enemies. So this would be like another mechanic just to make wave clearing a lot better. But yeah, I think that's it really. So that's really my build, or at least my take on what a Lightning Witchhunter build should be like. Hopefully, I guess I could help popularize some of the builds, because I think at the state of the current meta, everybody's just using grenades, and I wish, I guess, like more YouTubers or content creators decide to do more of the bullets, because again, if you look at some of the skill gems, there are so many options here. There's an opportunity to do totems, there's an opportunity to do, I guess, like more interesting grenades with storm blast bolts, for example. But then I guess what most people are just using are just gas grenades and explosive grenades, which is a bit boring in my opinion. But yeah, I guess I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and stay tuned for, I guess, more updates on what the late game build should be like.